Wow, 12 years ago, I was a real mess. I was having to take pain relievers to get to sleep at night, and huffing and puffing, going up and down stairs, and I was tired all the time. And the worst moment was when I walked out my back door and I found myself in a crumpled heap because my knee had given way. So I knew I needed to get something done about my health, but I also knew that for some time that God had been whispering to me, could you not tarry 1 hour? That question of couldn't I just pray more, have a more dedicated prayer life, kept ringing in my ears. So I decided that I was going to get up a little bit earlier and I was going to walk and I was going to pray while I walked. That was going to be pretty good for me because, you see, I'm not a morning person. But then one day I realized, you know, Janet, you're not an evening person either. In fact, you probably have 1 good hour in the middle of the day, lunch, and then you need a nap. But I did get up a little bit earlier and I started walking. And at first there was a lot of minus in my prayers. My job, my kids, my husband. And then that all changed one day, and I was walking by the little toddler towers in our community, a little daycare center, and I saw this single daddy's ballet of sorts. The young man got out of his pickup truck, and he went around to the other side, and he picked up his little bundle, and he carried that little bundle up onto the sidewalk and handled the little bundle to another daycare worker who was there before 6 o'clock in the morning. And the little bundle said, "Bye, Daddy, I love you." And at that very moment, I knew that God had me out in the streets of my community, not only for the minus of my prayers, but to watch for the needs of the others in my community. So I began praying for the business people in the town. I began praying for the teachers in the school as I walked by. I began praying for the loggers going out into the woods and for the mill workers going into the mill. And God changed my heart. First of all, he changed myself physically, and all those aches and pains went away, and I lost 2 dress sizes, and that was cool. But the bigger changes in my life were more emotional and spiritual, because the depression and the fear that had been clouding most of my adult life vanished. I knew that one day when I was in the kitchen and I was making lunches for my kids for school, and my son Josh came in and he said, "Mom, what are you doing?" And I said, "Making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches." He said, "No, Mom, you were singing, and it's not even 7 o'clock in the morning." So I knew that something had changed in me. But I also knew that God was making changes throughout my community because of my partnering with him in prayer. Because there was John and Lisa down the street. And one day when I was walking by their house, God prompted me. He said, "Pray that they'll get married, Janet." And they had been living together for a really long time, and I thought, okay, God, I'll pray. And sure enough, a couple months later, in the little newspaper in our community, there was an announcement that they were going to be getting married. And then there was another young lady, Christy, and she had just recently been diagnosed with MS, multiple sclerosis. And I began praying for her as I walked by the business where I knew she would work that day. And then soon after that, a couple months later, I found out that she had been designated as someone who was going to run the Olympic torch around the north side of Lake Tahoe. And then there was my neighbor, Sam. Now, Sam was a collector. He was a collector of yard art. Some people would call them automobiles, parked all over his lawn. And so I began praying for the blight in my community. And then one day God tapped me on the shoulder and he said, "Janet, what about the blight in his heart? Do you not care about his heart?" And I began praying that he would come to know the Lord Jesus Christ and that his life would be transformed. And shortly after that, a couple months later, God told me through a friend of mine that he had begun coming to church and he was praying through the Bible all the way. And I began thinking, God, this is really amazing, because I remembered about 2 years before that, as I looked out my window facing his house, there were 2 burning crosses faced in our direction. Because a little bit of time after that he was going to, we were going to be hosting the first Black South African exchange student through the Rotary program. God can change hearts if we will just tarry 1 hour or maybe just 10 minutes, as Pastor Bill is asking us to do. Thank you.